So what we're going to do today is, as you can see, did you notice something? Exactly. We're going to create an in-game options menu so that we can change the resolution, change full screen or not, change the quality level, and change enable and disable image effects, as you can see over here, and of course the resolution. Okay, now this has only example resolutions. Of course you should keep it, you should make sure to use which ones you want to use. Okay, but everything will work fine. And we can also have a default button and back, quit, and we can actually going to create a txt that has all our settings. So if I want to disable something, I can simply open it and come and change all the ones to whatever I want to disable, basically. And you will see that it will load the settings from the text file. Okay, you see that it's all disabled. Now there is a little bug that Unity does not render the check marks, but we're not going to worry about that now. Okay, and when I click back, I actually rewrite the txt. So I can come back over here, and you'll see that whenever we hit back, we're going to rewrite the settings txt once again. So let's start. Now I'm going to assume that you know how to work with the canvas and the UI, because this is going to be a pretty advanced tutorial. I'm not going to mess too much time with explaining the UI. So for our options menu, we have this. What I like to do whenever I have multiple buttons, like when I have the resolution, well, let's actually hit play so that we can see it directly. So in cases like this, where I have multiple buttons on a single line, or that basically do the same, I want to be placing all my game objects under a grid. So here is the resolution grid. So every button I create that goes under my resolution is going to be built upon the grid. Okay, and for each button, depending on what they do, I have a few references. Now in the case of the resolution, I only have a reference to the index and of course the text, so that I can change the text behind it. And the resolution index is basically in my options menu, and the script which we're going to write is the index for my resolutions. So in here, this is the options menu and the script we're going to write. We're going to keep all the references to what we need to know. So we have a references the list of references to all the quality names, to all the qualities we can use and we want to use. Okay, and these are basically directly from going to edit project and qualities. Okay, now I ignored the fastest because Unity exactly has a bug, and from what I read in the forums, it's not yet fixed. So I'm only going to ignore the fastest, and I'm only going to go as far as fast. So we have fantastic, beautiful, good, simple, and potato. Now what's important over here, it doesn't matter the order we have them over here. More important is the index. So for fantastic, the quality level will be 5. If I add more quality levels over here, then I should, if I want them to be able to select it, I also create a new entry in the list and add the index of 6. Similarly, with the resolution, we have a list of resolutions. Okay, you can add any more you want. We basically add the weight and height, the width and height you want. Now, for the other cases, which we have the full screen, which basically a boolean if it's on or off, but the full screen, for example, is a pretty special case since it is a boolean. Think it as a boolean anyway. Okay, but it uses the Unity's API, so we need to handle that and all that cases that uses the Unity's API. Okay, but we need to handle it a bit differently. Now, in most cases, if you change the resolution and full screen and the quality levels, those are going to be saved directly from Unity itself. So next time it will open, it's going to keep the previous quality resolutions. So just keep that in mind, that those you probably might not need them, but we're going to see how we can save them inside Unity, inside our options menu and the serialization we are going to do. And the image effects that you see over here, those are a special case too, but they are different from the full screen. They do not use the Unity's scripting API, but you need to go into, basically we have references for all of them into our main camera. Okay, but the problem that there is, now I'm using the image effects I'm using over here are from the standard assets. Okay, import package effects. Now the problem that we have is that from scene to scene we change main cameras. In most cases you won't use the same camera, so if I have a game example like this, now I only have one scene for this project, but I've also implemented it to the third person shooter series that we made. Okay, and over there we're still going to do the same stuff, but we're going to have a different cameras from the main menu to inside the game. So we basically need to take all the image effects from every camera we're going to use and load them up into our options menu, so that we can know if we can actually change them or not. And that job is going to be done by the level references. Now, the level references has an all properties, which we'll see what we're going to do. We're going to use this, but the most important thing for here is to have the same name into your level references and to the options menu into basically these two lists. C properties is the check properties list, and it's basically, I only have the full screen right now, but if you want to add more stuff, so like borderless window, FPS caps, all that, you're probably going to add them over here. Most of these cases are full, are special examples over here. It's just and as you can see, I have the full screen inside this list and I have it as separate. I'm going to do changes basically from the separate full screen, from the separate class, and we're going to see it inside the script. But basically, if you have and you want to use all the special cases that you're going to use, you want to add them into a list, so you do not have to go and independently add them every time. You can do changes or load stuff from directly inside the list. Okay, so even if I stopped over here, you will see that I have it, there's no entry inside the list, and when we start it's going to add them. We add it by script. Now the slider, the S properties stands for slider properties, and we're only going to see one example for the SSIO. That is the downsampling. It basically loads the value for the slider and moves it around. Okay, it will start with 0. Keep in mind the names are pretty important, and the other properties is all the other booleans that we see. So the image effects, for starters you want to know if you want it enabled or disabled. Okay, so the starting ones are going to be the ones I have over here. So if I click status over here, and now it's going to load them from the text file, so it's not going to actually show, but keep that in mind before you actually create the text file. Okay, so the important stuff we want to keep is have the same name. The check mark, of course, is the check mark, the game object, so you just need to assign it so that it opens and closes to indicate that it's enabled or not. Okay, and as you can see, the property is a mono behavior. I can drop any script inside the property. In our case, we want to use the image effects, of course, and it's just simply going to enable and disable it. But I have not assigned it anything over here because I want to load them from the level references. And the custom connector is what you, because I made this project to be basically imported into any project you want. You will only have to do changes inside the custom connector to actually do the changes into your game, because you're probably not going to use all the image effects I use over here, since most of these are just examples, and you might be using image effects from that are not the standard assets. Okay, so you only have to come over here and populate the properties. So for Bloom, I went into I locked this inspector, I opened a new inspector. If you do not know how to open a new inspector, you click this thing over here, add tab, inspector. Okay, and you can go into the main camera and change and assign the bloom. Now I can actually assign anything I want over here, any script I want, everything that takes from mono behavior, which basically is every script that can go into a game object. So it won't be wrong if you actually assign something else, but you'll not be closing the bloom in our case. So let's move on. Moving on, let's close the other properties, the full screen, so it is, and we have a few prefabs. The resolution prefab is the button prefab for the resolution. The active is the one that are yellow. Okay, these are just simply simple UI elements, UI buttons, and all that. We do not have to go over them. And the quality prefab is the prefab for the buttons that we create, because we create buttons for as many stuff we have into our list. Okay, the grid and the quality active is the resolution grid, which is as said what it is, and the quality grid is also the same. We're also going to have a main menu, but for most cases it's going to be the same as the one that we had, the asset bundles, and but yeah, we're going to see later on a later part, a more advanced use of the main menu, and we're going to create our own input manager later on another part, because of course with this since we do not have the resolution dialog in the beginning, then that means we cannot reassign the inputs. To actually disable the resolution manager, you need to go into project settings, player, and over here that says display resolution dialog, or over here, okay, you need to click disable or hidden by default. Okay, so let's actually dive inside the options menu. Now we're going to need all these namespaces. Okay, let's see the classes that we're going to use, the extra classes. Check properties, I told you what it is. It's for the full screen and every other special case we can have as a boolean, but it's a special case since it doesn't closes a mono behavior, it uses Unity's own API. We're going to need a property name, its status of course, and the game object is basically the UI game object. Quality level names. We need references to know the name, of course. The index, which is the index, as I said, it's fantastic, even if it's first inside the list. The index for the best quality will be at our case 5. And we also need a reference to the actual button, because when you select that quality level, we want to disable it and then re-enable it again. But I do not want to be messing around with it in the inspector, so I'm just closing it inside with the hide inspector. Pretty much the same with the resolutions, but we need to know the width and the height, and we also need to know the reference to the UI button, but I do not want to have it show inside the inspector. The other properties, still the name, which is what we use to identify the properties we want to change, their status, their mono behavior, which we said what it is, and the checkmark, which is the UI button, and the slider properties, the string and the value and the actual reference to the slider. Okay, because we can use from the slider, we can take directly the value. Now, of course, this class is a singleton, since it's the options menu, of course. And let's go back to the start again. So we need an array of our quality levels. We need to know the current resolution, because for saving purposes mostly. And we need to have an array for all our available resolutions. We also need a list of the check properties, a list of the other properties, and the slider properties. Yeah, of course I could have done a better naming job over here, but I think it's not that easy to know. The special case property that I have over here is, of course, the full screen. The references we need to know. The resolution, I told you what this is. Okay, just a button prefab, the active which is already created inside our menu, the button grid, and before I forget, the menu is also, the options menu is also under a grid. Okay, so if I want to change the height or all that, I can simply do it easily and not mess around with placing manually all my buttons. Quality prefab, quality active, and the quality grid. The custom connector is a script we're going to see, but we also need the reference over here. A dictionary is a dictionary so that we can actually save our default options. So when we click the default button, it's going to reset to all the values we had before. Init for this session and create for this session is pretty much the same, but we have different stuff in here and different stuff in here. because there is other stuff that are going to happen before between them, otherwise they're going to use them at the same. So I have made them all into regions so that we do not forget something. Let me close them and let's start. Initializing function. As you can see, we're not going to use start, but we're going to initialize this script from a few other scripts, mainly the level reference script. So whenever we load a level reference, which is a level reference script, okay, this is still a singleton, but we're not going to be taking it with us. So we're actually going to destroy every level reference game object when we're changing scenes. And on start, I'm going to call the main menu instance, and it's going to open the options menu, because sometimes this, if you have disabled the game object, sometimes this will not return, you won't be able to find this. Okay, so here's where we actually call the initialization of the options menu. We need to load, at first we need to load the reference from the level. Let's pick the definition, if it lessens, and it doesn't, because okay, let me erase this. So load reference for level. If you can actually find the level reference, now this is a bit redundant since the level reference is what actually loaded this. Okay, but there is some cases, or for testing, that you might not want to have a level reference. Okay, so if you can actually find it, call save the level references, and for each other property the level references have over there, basically just go and return the other property by name, which just takes the name and finds it and returns it and saves it over here, and we change that property with basically we change the mono behavior that we enable and disable from what we have inside the level references, and we assign the custom connector, which is also a singleton. Okay, and the custom connector also needs to go from level to level, and it's pretty much the same game object as the level reference. I just keep it as a different script so it's easier to know what to change or not. Okay, and let's actually see this too, the return other property by name. But okay, it's very simple. Return, you pass the string, looks into our other properties list, and if it finds an entry with the same name, then it returns that property. And let's close our picking. So we want to do this only for once where we start the game. We need to populate the properties list, which basically goes and takes, you will add any special case you have over here, and in my case I only have the full screen, and it will add it inside the C properties, the check properties list. Okay, simple enough. If I have another special case, then I will also add it over here. So you basically have a list, although with one entry it's pretty hard to see why we need a list, but keep in mind that you might have this is a template pretty much, so if your game needs to have 5 special properties like this, like the full screen, then you can't just be copy pasting the code. You can simply go and use something like this. We populate the properties list, as I said. Then we can go and save the defaults. We save the defaults because we pretty much take the defaults, everything we left, the way we left everything from inside our project. Okay, so what this means, before it loads everything from the text file and then loads the settings, we need to save the defaults of the previous stuff, so if we want to reset them, we can actually reset them. So to save the defaults is where we're actually going to use the dictionary we saw in the beginning. So for each other properties we have into our other properties list, we're going to add a new entry into our default options. And a dictionary is basically you pass a string and you pass a value. Okay, in our case we want to pass an integer. So default options dot add, we pass the name, although I think we could probably just pass the boolean, but with this case we can actually, because PlayerPrefs you cannot save booleans, you have to save 1 or 0. Okay, so we just use it the same. So we pass the name of the property and we pass its status. So if it's true, it's going to write it as 1, else it's going to write it as 0. The same for check properties and the same for S properties, slider properties. But for slider properties, you'll see that we're passing it as directly the value. Now, slider properties have integers, even though the sliders have floats. It's rarely you're going to see sliders that use floats or values that couldn't be integers. Okay, just keep in mind I'm going to use integers over here. And assign my slider definition. Okay, I have it as an integer. And then I need to add the other two special cases I have, which is the quality, and I just use quality settings. Get quality level is Unity's own API. Okay, so if it's at the fantastic quality level, then this is going to return 5, an integer basically. Okay, and the last one is the resolution, the current resolution, which is going to be on start is going to be 0, so that means it's going to be saved at the highest resolution possible. And you can actually change the current resolution directly from over here. Okay, if I initialize it as 1, then it's going to save 1 as the default. So we save the defaults. We can say this has initialized for the session. And now we go into something more specific, which is if we are in the Unity editor to actually test the PlayerPrefs. Okay, have this function that save everything into the PlayerPrefs, but we only want to do that when we are actually in the Unity editor. On the build, this is not going to run. So save PlayerPrefs is pretty much the same. Okay, so for every property, for every check property, for every slider property, but instead of writing them into the dictionary, it's going to write them into the PlayerPrefs. Okay, but also it's going to do the changes on the status over here. So it will go and say into the property you have inside your other properties list. If it's enabled, it's controlled by the status of that property, and the check mark, if it's enabled or not, it's also going to be controlled by the status of that property. The same for the check properties, but only for the check mark. And the slider properties, you do not have to change anything, you simply need to save the value. And Over here we also have the option to, if we want to write a text file or not. And I simply just didn't want to have it over here, so I just commented out. Then we basically initialized everything for the first time we run the init function, and now we can actually load the settings from our text file. Now keep in mind that loading from a text file, since we are using PlayerPrefs, it might not be even needed, okay, because your users can actually go into their file system and go into for each OS it has their own file path, okay, and do the changes from the PlayerPrefs there. But this way it's going to be slightly easier because it's going to include the settings inside the resolution inside the data folder, okay, where we have all the mono and all the other DLLs. We're going to make them include them inside the streaming assets folder. The streaming assets folder is, as we saw in the previous video where it was about asset bundles, it's a file that if you have it inside your project, it's going to include everything in it inside your build. Okay, and the good thing about it is that it's actually not going to try and change them. Like Unity is going to include the resources folder if you include it inside your project folder, but it's going to encode them or compress them sometimes. So with streaming assets, you just take the asset as it is. Okay, so basically it goes to how easy you want to make them into your players to actually be able to change settings or everything else you might want from a TXT, because if somebody is pretty advanced, then he can actually go and hack your DLL and do changes, so he wouldn't care. Okay, this is entirely optional and entirely up to you if you want to have it or not. So let's see how to actually do it, and you can decide if you want it or not. So, load from text file. We need to first check, of course, if the file actually exists. Path.combine comes from the input-output namespace of system, of course, and basically combines the application streaming asset path with the name of the text we want to use. In our case, settings.txt. We have a string of data which we use to read all the text we have inside the settings.txt. Okay, and we pass the name since we know this file exists. And then we have string, an array of strings of lines when we're going to use the data, but we're going to split with a new array of strings on every environment, a new line. Basically, for every OS, it's going to either write either going to use this or this or this, okay, but it automatically changes it for every OS, so it works on every environment. And then we use the function string split options, so it removes every empty entry. Now keep in mind that you shouldn't include spaces before the okay, you see that spaces not always work as we want, so it's best to just not use them. So if I have a space over here, then there's a good chance that it's not going to read the quality. So for each string line we have inside our lines, and for each array we have inside that line, we can actually split them again in basically two entries over here. So whichever equals symbol it finds, it's going to split it and remove the empty entries, of course. And then if the item length is 2, that means we have a property and the value. We can try and parse the value. To parse an integer, for example, like this, we need to use int.tryParse. We pass the value and where we actually want to assign it. So if it can actually parse the value we have over here, remember, because this is a string, okay, it's going to change the v over here. And since you can actually parse it, if it can actually parse it, otherwise it's going to turn out 0, okay, then that means you actually have a value to use and pass on the set integer. So we can change the PlayerPrefs directly and set the integer over there. So for that property name, we change the PlayerPrefs. If it doesn't have a length, the length of 2, so we do not have 2 properties, then it's going to debug that is a wrong format. Okay. Otherwise, if it cannot find the settings.txt, it's going to debug as settings.txt not found, and it's going to return. So we load the settings from the txt. Then we can actually come and load the actual settings. To load the actual settings, we have separated the functions: load check property settings, load other property settings, load slider property settings, which is check properties. For each check properties, the mark, basically its value, not just mark. Okay, you can simply change this to v for value, whatever works for you. Get integer with the property name. So it's going to look into the PlayerPrefs. The PlayerPrefs is pretty much a dictionary. Okay, you pass a name and a value. When you want to find that value, you pass the name again. And in our case, the value we have saved it as the property name. Okay, it's going to come it over here, and you can have a boolean, or you can simply do this. So the status will be if the value is 1, is equal to 1, then that means its status is enabled. Otherwise it's going to be false. And you can also enable the UI game object, so to indicate that it's actually enabled. Okay. Similarly to the other property settings, okay, the same as above, status, but you also need to change the property value of the other property, the mono behavior we have set. So the image effects. Load slider properties, you get the integer with the name, you passing, you set the value, but you need to go into the custom connector and call the function that we're going to see towards the end, which updates the slider property. Okay, we pass the name and we pass the value, and we handle stuff a bit different over there. But we also need to change the UI. The SL over here is the reference to the slider, the UI element slider, and we want to change the value from directly, so it actually updates in the UI, in the main menu. Okay, so that's how we actually load our settings. Now, if you haven't already, so we only want to do this once, we want to initialize our buttons. Basically, create the buttons. So for each resolution entry we have into a list, we instantiate a resolution prefab. the resolution prefabs also have a component, a script, this is called resolution button, and we can actually go to the definition. It has a reference to the text, to the UI text, and the index is what we actually we care most. And we initialize it, we pass the available resolution, the entry basically, and the index. We change the text to the weight and the height for that available resolution, and we reassign the resolution index to the index. And we also have a public function over here. If we want to change the resolution, we simply do it directly like this. We call into our options menu from the singleton and then change the resolution. Let's go back. Okay, we set it under the resolution button grid after we've created, and we assign the resolution button, the UI button, to the resolution entry, so we know which one to close or not. Set active resolution, as you might have guessed, uses the Unity's API. Okay, it finds the current resolution, which is the one we actually saved inside our PlayerPrefs, and then it makes the button, the active button, it enables it. It initializes that button, so the active button also has the resolution button, and by active I mean this yellow stuff over here, okay, to indicate which is the selected resolution. Okay, and disables the previous its game object, the other game object that the resolution have stored. This is the change resolution. This is the function that if we want to change the resolution, we simply pass the integer, okay, which is what we call from our buttons for our resolution. So we pass the integer, we find the resolution integer with the index we are passing, and we use screen.setResolution, the width that we have stored inside the resolution, and the height we have also stored inside our available resolution. And we control if it's full screen or not from fullscreen.status. Okay, we also debug it because changing the resolution does not actually work inside the editor, it only works into builds. And we also then save into our PlayerPrefs, into our resolution tag, the index we just passed, and we also change the set active resolution. And init buttons, we also need to see init quality buttons, which is pretty much the same. For every quality we have, we create a new button, we get a quality button script, which is almost the same as the resolution buttons. Okay, we pass the reference to the UI text, the resolution index, which is what we care most. To initialize it, we just simply pass the quality level name entry and the index, and we change the values. And when we actually want to change the quality, we simply call the from the singleton change quality, and we pass the resolution index. So what I mean with these public functions, if I go into my prefabs, you will see that on click I drag and drop the quality button script that I have over here and go and set the change quality. Okay, same for the resolution prefab. So back again, init quality buttons. Let's close this. We created the buttons. Now we need to check if there is a case that our quality level is not the same as the one we have stored inside our PlayerPrefs, which is rarely going to be the case because, as I said, Unity already saves it by itself. Okay, but let's just keep it just for safekeeping because you never know when they're going to change stuff. Okay, if it's not, then just call the function to change the quality with the quality we have stored inside our PlayerPref. To change the quality, we need to make sure that we're not changing a quality from that we do not have inside our list, even though if you used a bigger index, then it's going to give you the biggest quality it can find, the highest quality it can find, but this is a bit safer. Okay, so I like it better this way. And you can see that I do not allow it to go into the fastest quality, which is that will be the index of 0. So quality level name, we return the quality. To return the quality, you can see that we pass the target, it searches into our quality list, and if it finds the index is the same as the one we want into our target, then it returns that quality level name, the quality entry. And we were over here. Okay, we have the quality we want, then we need to call set quality level, and from that quality level name we pass the index we have saved. Okay, so this passes the index for the list, and by list I mean the entry over here. So for Fantastic it's going to pass the 0 index, but the actual quality level that is inside Unity is the index over here, so it's 5. This might be a bit confusing, but just try it and you will see that it's not that much. Okay, so it passes the index of what we have from that quality level names entry from that list. And true, the true over here is because this you have to think about if you want to have it true or false, because changing quality level might have some operations, some performance issues, because it applies with true it applies some heavy performance and heavy processing cases. Okay, so depending on your platform and depending on what you want to do, you might want to keep this true or false. And basically it's, if you see on other games, what says some changes might apply after you restart the game, well, this does this. Okay, this might, with this true or false, it's, you might want to have that message appear or not, depending of course on what your game is about. We save the PlayerPref to the quality entry to the index we just saved, and we set the active quality once again. Okay, but we check to see if we already had a previous quality name, so we pass the active quality active was over here, public quality button. So the previous so we check if we had the previous active button, which we did. Okay, if that was a null, then we simply reopen the previous button, and then we redo everything again. We find the quality, the new quality level name, the current quality. Okay, and we set the quality active. We initialize it with passing the quality level name and the index, and we close that quality button, Okay, this is fairly simple, and if you just try to write it, you will see that in most cases they come naturally. Okay, so basically when you click a button you want to close it. Okay, if you want to open another button, then the closed button you had before, you probably need to open it again. Okay, where did you save that? On the active quality button. So you check what the active quality button had stored before, you open that button and you close the new button. Okay, it's really simple, trust me. So basically with this we covered most of the stuff. You can see that I'm closing. I only want this to be created from a single session, from once in every session, and then I want to disable the options menu because I do not want this, because basically disables also the main menu. Since I have the script over here inside my options menu game object, disabling this game object means the options menu is closed. So with this we pretty much covered most of the options menu. We saw logic settings, we saw how to initialize and create buttons, we saw how to save PlayerPrefs, how to save the defaults, how to initialize the resolution buttons, how to initialize the quality buttons, how to populate a property list, and we saw what it is, how to load the check properties, how to load the other properties, the slider properties, the load references from the level, loading from a text file. Now we need to see, which is a public void, when we actually want to save on a text file. And I have this, I do not want this to run every time I'm doing a change over here, because it's you can consider it that it's expensive, even though I have a few entries, but you might want to have a lot more entries at once. So basically you do not need it. When the player hits back, like I did over here, okay, then I go into my menu manager, so whenever it tries to open the main menu, it's going to check if the current active menu is the options menu, and we will see in a bit the main menu script. Okay, and then it's going to call the save on text file. So basically whenever you hit the back button, it's going to check if the previous open menu was the options menu, and then if it was, it's going to actually save the text file there. So how to save a text file on that? We need to start with a string of data, okay, and it's an empty string basically. For each check property we have, we need to store the value, and we get that from the PlayerPrefs, and then we add it inside our data. But to actually add it, we need to pass the property name plus the equal sign plus the value to string plus the environment new line. Okay, so it goes underneath it. For each other property we do the same. For each slider properties we do the same, and that's why we use the check property list. Okay, otherwise I'll just have to do it every time for the full screen. For every other case I just have to use it and rewrite code, so we do not need to do that. Okay, so we have our properties which are on a list. We need to also save the quality settings. We can hardcode quality equals, and then we get the quality level we have, and we also need to pass to string plus the environment new line. For the resolution the same, we store the current resolution plus new line, and everything else you want to save into a text file you can add it inside the data. And then we use debug log, just so that we know that we are writing on a file. We use the debug log, and we use file.writeAllText, the path file, and the settings, the name of the file, which is in our case settings.txt, and we pass the string value, which is the data. Okay, pretty simple. Reset options is what goes into the reset options button, or defaults, however you want to call it. So basically it goes to, for each property, it loads them, instead of loading them from the PlayerPrefs, it gets them from the new dictionary, which we saved it as default options. So it tries to get the value from it tries to get the value with the property name, and it outputs it into the v. If the v is equal to 1, then the status will be true, and then do the changes to the checkmark and to the mono behavior, what we need to be enabled or not. Same for the check properties, but only changes the status, and the rest slider properties and all that. Same for quality, same for resolution. If by any case the resolution is not the one we have in the default values, then it changes the quality, and if the current resolution is not the actual resolution we have into saved in our defaults, then it's going to also change the resolution. Now there is a special case that we haven't checked. We see how we can change the resolution. We saw how to set the active resolution, of course. So this, we've seen it. The quality levels, we also seen that. But we haven't seen the actual how to change the actual properties. We're going to use the same function to change the properties, but we have two different lists. We have the other properties list, and we need to know if the property we want to change is from the other property list or it's from the check properties list. To indicate that, we're going to use a boolean. So we pass the name of the property we want to use, and if it's on other properties or not. If it's not on other properties, then it's going to invoke a function that has the same name as the property we want to change. In our case, that will be the full screen. And it's going to call this function. So whenever, if we want to be on full screen or not, it's going to be the opposite. The status is going to be the opposite of what it was. Okay, it's going to save the PlayerPrefs its actual value. So if the full screen is true, we want full screen, then it's going to save it as 1. Otherwise, it's going to save it as 0. It's going to enable or disable the check mark for the full screen, and it's going to whenever you change the full screen, to actually see the change, you need to change the resolution, because it's controlled by the resolution. So you could just you find the current resolution and just call the change resolution function once again. Okay. Now, in case this was into another properties, then you need to call into the other way of our if statement over here. We need to find the other properties, the other property we want to change. We do this by passing the name. Okay, and if there is a property with the same name, then it's going to return it. So if we actually found that property, we switch the status with the opposite of its own status, and we change the checkmark, the UI element, and we also change the property, the mono behavior property, to be enabled or not based on the status. And we also save that inside PlayerPrefs. Okay, we pass the name, and if the status is true or false, either write 1 or 0. Now, this function, it's called from the buttons over here. So inside my other settings, inside my Bloom, for example, I have the script which is called bool button, although the name it's not that appropriate. Okay, public string bool name, it's basically the property's name, and if you want to look into other properties. So for all these cases, I actually want to write the name of the property, not bool name. Okay, and I also want to take look into other properties. The names are important, as I said, otherwise you won't be able to find the correct name, the correct property. So this is how you change the properties. Pass change to property, you simply, I don't think I use it anywhere, but you simply pass the exact name and you pass the exact status you want. Okay, pretty much the same as the change property, the above change property, but it, instead of using the opposite of the status, changes to the status you want to use. But I do not think I've used it anywhere, so let's move on. So this, and I think we pretty much are done. Return another property by name, general properties, yeah, we're pretty much done. Now it's not that easy to set up, but you just need a little practice, and it pretty much, when you start making it, you will see that every error you'll have, it's pretty much just some logical application. Okay, so if you get an error that doesn't, you haven't set a reference, that means you haven't set a reference. And yeah, it's fairly simple actually, but you need to just to spend a bit time with it to actually make it as it is. So let's see the other stuff. Let's see our case for the custom connector. Now, custom connector goes into every script that has the level, every game object that has the level reference. Okay, so a custom connector in this project, since I use the standard assets image effects, okay, it's going to call when we say update slider property. This needs a reference to the screen space ambient obscurance. Okay, and I just drag and drop this from the inspector over here. I take it from the camera and just drag and drop it. Now, whenever I call this update slider property, I use the name and a value. So I can actually, this is where we actually hard code the values, and I have a switch with a name. So if I pass a name of SSAO down for downsample, then I can come over here and I have my hard coded value SSAO dot downsample equals mathf dot round to integer and value. If I wanted the case that let's say bloom intensity, okay, break, then I need a reference to my bloom, and I will have bloom dot intensity or bloom intensity. This is entirely on how your the image effects you are using are going to be using. Not float, the value we have above. Now, since the SSAO uses integers, I have to round to integer. Okay, and then just go and create a new slider property for the bloom, and let's see it. Let's try and make it over here. I'm going to take the previous downsampling I have. I'm actually going to take the whole grid because I do not have one. I'm going to have it under my check mark, and I'm going to reset its position. And yeah, I have to set it actually. Have to set it up. So I'll just leave it over here. Let's change the name to label. Let's say it to intensity. Now the slider button, the script, slider button script, which goes under the sliders. Okay, same slider, just gets the component of the slider and calls the change slider property from the options menu. And in this case it rounds to an int. Now where we were, over here. Okay, we have our intensity. Let's put the grid a bit more down, and I do not think I have anything else. Yeah, I do not have anything else. So let's actually do the connection. We need to go into our options menu, to our slider properties. I'm going to add one more, and I'm going to call it bloom intensity. Bloom intensity. And I'm going to make sure that I have the same names inside my custom connector. Okay, let's have it over here, and let's see, I need to change the slider value of the slider name to bloom intensity. And I also need to change to assign the slider into my bloom intensity over here. So right now it will probably play, and it won't. Let's see why not. And yeah, and it doesn't because I do not have set a level reference for it, and I forgot to add it inside my custom connector. I'm going to assign the main camera, and let's hit play. Let's maximize it. Options, and I have bloom intensity. Now of course these are integers, and we can actually come over here and say public bool use floats, and no, change slider property. It takes an integer. So anyway, let's just keep it like this. You can just create a new you can create a new function just for floats. Let's just keep it as floats, but let's change this. Let's change the values. It can go from 0 to 1. Let's make that to 5. Yeah. Okay, so let's click play. Options. I can now raise and lower the intensity to how much I want. So you see that with that template we just created, how easy it is to add or disable something. You can see the depth of field behind. You can see the downsampling into, although I think in the video you probably won't be able to see it, but it shows. Okay, there's some changes. I can enable and disable that once again, and of course the anti-aliasing, which I can see it, but I don't know if you will be able to see it into your video. Of course, the change the quality does a lot of stuff. You can actually see it a lot. And change the resolution, I can only indicate it inside the editor by using this. Now let's see the last stuff that we have to see, which is the actual main menu manager. and we're going to see a bit more on the next video. But we saw some stuff from the Asset Bundles video, so let's just go blaze through it pretty fast. Okay, we have the loading game object and loading variables. We're not using this in this video. We said loading is just simply a timer that adds a dot into our loading text when we load. We're not loading in this project. Enable menu, and if you are actually in the inside the game menu, okay, the main menu grid or the main game object, never mind the grid, you actually need to assign the whole game object, main menu game object, and this one, okay, that has all the options in it. And similarly, we also have a list of buttons for our main menu. Okay, if I want it to be enabled or not, if I want a game object to be disabled, I will just untick this one. Okay, and there's not going to be inside my main menu. This is also a grid, and I've also have, if I want this option to be inside the main menu only, inside the in-game menu, or if I want to be shown on all main menus. So options, I can make it to all, and the quit I can also make it to all cases. So the list of menu buttons, let's see the definition. Preferred position is to actually the preferred position is if we have the game objects, no matter the list we have it over here, the order we have over here, it's going to try and change them into the preferred position. If it's a higher position, of course it's always going to go to the bottom. So the quit option, if I put 10, it's always going to be beneath it. So if I add another one, let's make this to be 3, and yeah, it's going to use a quit now, but you will see that it's going to add, it's not going to add anything because it's the same game object. Let's use the options too. Okay, if I duplicate it and create a new game object, it's going to go beneath it. But if I add it over here, you will see that it's going to go above, and it's not going to work, of course. So yeah, let's just fuck it. Let's remove this entry, and we'll worry about that later. Preferred position, game object, if it's enabled or not, and the status menu for the status. Okay, main menu of course is also a singleton. It's the main menu after all. And first game timer when on menu is if you are inside the game, and if you actually when you are pressing the escape button, if you want to freeze time or not. So the back button and the options default button, and I think I forgot something, or I didn't. Anyway, now on start, with the current active menu will be the main menu button, and you open the buttons. To open the buttons, you of course first close all the buttons. Okay, you close all the buttons, and then you go for each menu button you have over here, if it's enabled, and if that menu button is for the main menu button, or the main menu button be the main menu status all, then you go. So for every button, as I said, you need to go, and if it's the current main menu status or the old main menu status, then it's going to enable it and then set the sampling index to the preferred position, which of course doesn't work. Now on update, if we are loading, then we want to disable the main menu, and we load as we saw onto the asset bundles video. Okay, we load, and every half a second we add a dot to our loading text. Otherwise, if it's greater than 3, then we simply say do it to be loading again. If we are not loading, we want to enable the main menu and close the loading, the bar that says loading. We have a switch with our main menu status. So if we are in the main menu, if we have the current active menu, if it's enabled or not, it's controlled by the enable menu boolean. If we are in the in-game main menu status, it's controlled if we are loading or not from the in-game menu boolean, okay, or false. If in-game menu is true and we want to freeze on menu, then we change the time scale to 0 and change the time scale to 1. Okay, and then it goes to, we saw the close buttons, we saw this is the enumeration for the main menu status, and right down it comes pretty much right down to making functions to assign them into our UI buttons. So we're not going to really go into much detail since we already saw some of it into the asset bundles video. So for instance, if you want to open the options menu, you assign this function into the options button. So what you do, you enable the options default button, the back button you enable too, you change the current active menu to the options menu, and you can go into the options menu, get component, the options menu, and click to load the settings. You need to load the settings so it actually updates the values into your UI element. Okay. To open the main menu, we saw it before. The change current active menu, basically what it does, closes the previous one, it assigns the new one that you passed, the target menu, and enables that. Now we're going to see this in a bit more detail later on the next video, since we're going to also add we're going to create our own input manager and have rebindable controls from in-game. Okay, so the good thing with this system is that we can actually have it as we can actually, if I delete the scene and all the art behind it, I can actually export my scene, export package, which I'm going to do. I'm going to also include this, of course, on Gumroad for the price of a large coffee. So if you want to reuse it again, you can go from project to project. So let's see it on another project. So this is the other project that we have. Of course, you know which one it is. And here is a more complete menu, and here's how it's going to look when we do the next part. And the next part we're also going to do controls. Okay, so for I can actually rebind controls and whatever I want. Okay, I'm going to keep it as this, and I can also have defaults different from the rebinding controls. And the options, I can of course change them. But now here's where the custom connector comes into play, because I'm not using the same I'm not using the standard assets. I have to tailor it to use the image effects all that I have over here. Okay, so in this case I will go to the level reference and go to my custom connector. We'll wait for Visual Studio is open, of course. Okay, so where I had my reference to the standard assets, image effects, okay, I do not have them anymore. I have deleted that, and I use the SSAO Pro and use that reference. But basically, pretty much comes down into changing it to the correct reference and changing it to the correct value, or to affect the correct example. So in this case it was downsampling. And this actually, since this has another level that we're changing, you will see that I have my level reference over here, which is this one. So whenever I click new game and start new game, it's going to load the next level, and it's going to go into this level references, and it's going to load all basically the image effects from this camera, and this camera is underneath our third person camera holder, and continuing on to all that. Okay, now of course this has them disabled. Let's go and see. Let's hit play, and I think, yeah, we're pretty much done with this part. We're already 1 hour and a half, so I'm going to add the video over here, since we're also going to check if, let's enable it, or let's hit default. Let's click back, let's hit new game, start game, and you can see that I have all my image effects back up again. Okay, so I'll end the video over here. If you like the video, then you know what to do. Subscribe, support, and all that. And you can also pick up the options menu template from Gumroad, of course, and for the price of a small coffee. I think it's more than fair. So I'll see you next time.